Are you lying to Congress today when you say you are pro-vaccine? Or did you lie on all those podcasts? We have all of this on tape, by the way.
Senator, as you know, because it's been repeatedly debunked, that statement that I made on the Lex Friedman podcast was a fragment of the statement. I've corrected it many times, including on national TV. You know about this, Senator Wyden, so bringing this up right now is dishonest.
RFK Jr. is in the hot seat today, testifying before the Senate Finance Committee in his bid to lead the Department of Health and Human Services. Kennedy was grilled by Democrats about his views on vaccines and abortion. And yesterday, Caroline Kennedy looked to derail his nomination.
His views on vaccines are dangerous and willfully misinformed. I've known Bobby my whole life. We grew up together. It's no surprise that he keeps birds of prey as pets, because Bobby himself is a predator.
So far, Kennedy has stayed steady, even promising not to take away McDonald's cheeseburgers, something that he said his boss, President Trump, loves. But joining me now is the Hill's Nile Stanage with all of the information on this explosive hearing and more. Nile, thanks so much for joining us. Let's start right there with RFK. He got into his opening statement, and right off the bat, we saw some protesters. Let's take a look.
News reports have claimed that I'm anti-vaccine or anti-industry. I am neither. I am pro-safety.
Obviously, a lot of attention on RFK Jr.'s stance on vaccines, but how do you think he's faring so far?
He's faring, I think, broadly as expected. We expected him to come under attack for all his statements on vaccines. Now, he would characterize himself as someone who wants further testing of vaccines. His critics hit back at that and say, look, he is obviously anti-vax. But it's interesting that that isn't the only contentious topic here. You mentioned abortion, and of course, from the Republican side, from the social conservative side, their worry is that he's essentially too pro-abortion rights. So he's having to navigate this course. I think he's done okay so far, but it's very controversial by its nature.
Now, RFK is the star of the show today, but there's still a lot more to come this week on Capitol Hill. We have these hearings later this week on Kash Patel and Tulsi Gabbard. Want to ask you about each of them. We'll start with Patel, Donald Trump's pick to lead the FBI. In the lead up to this hearing, Senate Republicans have been facing some pressure from some people within their own party to not confirm him. This something that was sent by former Trump Attorney General Bill Barr, also included National Security Advisor John Bolton, some other folks. Do you think this pressure from these former officials, do you think it's going to have any sway?
Not really, because of who those former officials are and how they are seen by Trump world. John Bolton in particular is just derided by Trump people constantly because they see him as a neocon. He might actually accept that label himself, but they also see him as someone who has become de facto anti-Trump. And of course he pops up on TV networks quite often to level pretty vigorous criticism against President Trump. And you know, the same with the other person you mentioned, who's also perceived less so than Bolton, but as a kind of anti-Trump figure. That just isn't where the Republican Party is right now.
And let's talk about Gabbard, who's set to go before the Senate Intelligence Committee this week. This is another confirmation battle in which we've been closely watching the votes here. If the committee doesn't give her a favorable recommendation, what's Republicans' plan here?
I'm not quite clear what the plan is. I mean, I think for the moment all the eggs are in the Tulsi Gabbard basket, and that itself is interesting because she is controversial for quite different reasons than some of these other nominees. Obviously, she's a former Democratic Congresswoman, but more to the point, her overall worldview is not one that really most Republicans share even now. She is predominantly anti-interventionist. She has been accused of echoing Russian talking points about the war in Ukraine and so forth. So I think there is a greater danger in her case of some Republicans being peeled off. I'm not saying she's going to go down to defeat, she may not, but I do think the dangers are a little bit higher in her case.
And of course, in the midst of all the chaos of these confirmation battles, Trump has also been making news on the terms of federal employees. Last night, the administration offered almost all federal employees the option to submit resignations by February 6th and then get paid through September. What authority does Trump have here, and how have Democrats been reacting to this?
So the authority question is a complicated one. Obviously, it is normally Congress that has the power of the purse, and I will leave it to lawyers who know more about that than I do to discuss the exact element of whether whether he has the authority. This obviously is taking place amid a backdrop of all these Trump executive orders that are very sweeping indeed. It's no secret that the president wants to reduce the federal workforce, no secret that he has deployed Elon Musk, among other people, to try to help with that effort. So this offer of a buyout, I mean, of course, critics are going to hit back against it, but it is a predominantly voluntary thing. One wrinkle in it is that the unions who represent the federal workforce believe that Trump is trying to create essentially an atmosphere that drives people out.
And meanwhile, Trump is expected to sign an executive order that would defund schools that teach critical race theory and gender ideology. This, of course, is coming as we're getting ready for a confirmation battle over Trump's pick for education secretary. What do you make of this order, and where do you think the education department is going with all these moves?
Again, it's part of the broader picture, which is Trump hitting out as much as he can do at DEI, at this idea of wokeness, quote unquote. And this comes within the context of a Republican Party that has been often pretty hostile to the education department itself. I mean, there are a lot of conservatives who don't believe that the Department of Education should exist, period. So I think you fuse that skepticism of federal control of education with the Trump opposition or criticism of DEI, and you end up in situations like this.
Now, today in Washington, we do have some bipartisan unity on one issue. President Trump will be signing the Laken-Riley Act into law today. That was a bill that Democrats had helped Republicans push through Congress. But I want to ask you before I let you go about a piece of legislation that Democrats have not been playing ball with, and that is this push to sanction the International Criminal Court. What do you make of Democrats' moves here, and do you think this is tied at all as this payback for this whole debacle over federal aid freezing? I
think that the International Criminal Court measure, I think partly is emblematic of a reluctance on the part of Democrats to cross the aisle or to support Trump-type measures unless they absolutely have to. You mentioned the Laken-Riley Act. That's obviously an exception to this. Immigration is an issue where Democrats have a lot of vulnerability. On the ICC bill, with the exception of John Fetterman, they decided not to back the Republican position, sometimes couching their opposition in nuanced terms. Chuck Schumer, for example, suggested he basically supports the aim, but he thought the bill was badly drafted. So I think that there are Democrats who are simply wanting to not back Trump measures and to find plausible pretexts for those actions.
Well, that's all I've got. Nile Stanage, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
After months of sweeping fear over New Jersey mysterious drone sightings, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt kicked off her first press briefing yesterday, announcing that those drones were, quote, not the enemy. Quoting President Trump, she said that many were doing FAA research, leaving more questions than answers for residents. News Nation's Rich McHugh joins us today from New Jersey with more on this mystery.
President Trump said these drones were approved by the FAA for research, but the reaction here in New Jersey, the epicenter of this drone madness, is one of disbelief and frustration with both the White House and the FAA. Now, I reached out to the FAA with very specific questions about the situation. They responded with one sentence, and I want to read it. Please contact the White House for their official statement. Now, I also spoke with New Jersey State Assemblyman Brian Bergen. He's been very outspoken on this issue from the beginning, demanding answers. Here's what he had to say just earlier.
What we got from the White House makes no sense. What we got from the FAA makes no sense. Because, again, what the White House said was the drones up there were authorized to be there by the FAA. Everything in the sky is authorized to be there by the FAA, or it wouldn't be in the sky. I just want somebody normal to get up in front of us and give us the truth, the straight truth. No canned response, no carefully chosen words, no dancing around it. Just tell us.
Now, I also spoke with Ocean County Sheriff Michael Mastronardi. His team had been documenting these drones with their own drone teams, and I met with him back in December. But here's what he had to say today on this news. He said, if these are the facts, I wish they told us the facts sooner. The FAA, by not being upfront, could have caused harm. Now, here in Monmouth County, I spoke with Sheriff Sean Golden. Monmouth County has been the epicenter. He created the heat map here of all these drone sightings. He agrees, and here's what he had to say.
In this day and age, particularly in a post 9/11 era, particularly in an area of threats and risk assessments, when we have an agency withholding information like that and not telling their own federal partners that were involved in this and not telling state and county and local officials what was happening, it really is disturbing to me, and something needs to be done.
Now here's the thing, the FAA could have come out in December and explained to the public what was going on. The FAA could have come out in December or even November and explained to law enforcement what was going on, but they did not. The question I have is, why did the FAA put a temporary ban on these drone flights for, quote, security reasons in January? That's a question they would not answer. Back to you.
Thanks to Rich for that report. President Trump is asking Elon Musk for a favor. The president is requesting the SpaceX CEO's help retrieving the NASA astronauts that have been stuck in space since June. Astronauts Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore traveled to the International Space Station as part of the Boeing Starliner mission, but they experienced technical issues like thruster malfunctions. Their trip was meant to be 8 to 10 days, but now it's lasted over half a year. Trump posted this on Truth Social, quote, "I have just asked Elon Musk and SpaceX to go get the 2 brave astronauts who have been virtually abandoned in space by the Biden administration." He went on to say that they have been waiting for many months on the space station. Elon will soon be on his way. Hopefully all will be safe. And he ended that message with, "Good luck, Elon." NASA says that they expect to send a 4-person SpaceX crew in late March of this year to retrieve the astronauts. That's according to a mid-December press release. Musk posted on X Tuesday evening reaffirming SpaceX's support of bringing the astronauts home. Happening today, the Federal Reserve Board is set to wrap up its first meeting of the new year Wednesday, and the first meeting under this new administration. Experts say that they are expecting the Fed to press pause on the interest rate cuts this month, after they lowered rates by a full percentage point late last year. Those cuts were in response to a strong labor market and falling inflation that finished out 2024. December's Consumer Price Index report suggested that inflation had eased more than expected, which could signal a rate cut in the future. But with the new year and the new administration, economists say that they expect the central bank will keep rates steady to give more time to collect information and decide on a path forward. Experts say that in order for the Fed to cut rates at their next meeting, which will be in March, they will need to see additional data confirming that inflation is still on the decline. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Zach Schonfeld. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel. And come back here soon for more on the intersection between politics and policy.